Hi, I'm Joe Tolles. Growing up in the foster care system, working within it, and single-handedly raising 8 teens adopted from the foster care system has given me a unique view into that world. My reputation for working to keep children connected, healthy, and happy with families who love them is important to me. Who I am today is a far cry from what my circumstances might have dictated. To start, I had to navigate my own childhood hurdles to become the athlete, father, and therapist I am today. Together with child advocate specialist Renee Damon and our guest, I will highlight the issues that impacted me on my journey, issues that are most likely impacting children and families today. Join us as we examine my first steps out of the starting blocks and into the race. Chapter 3: The Invisible Man. My journey to understand the circumstances that led me into foster care has been a long and winding road, often filled with more questions than answers. It's been a deeply personal quest to uncover the hidden origins that shaped my father's life and in turn influenced my own path. The details I've managed to gather about him and his family remain elusive, as if this history is cloaked in secrecy or buried under years of silence. My father's biological father, a man I know only through fragments of information, is one of the many missing pieces. He enlisted in World War II when my father was just a toddler, leaving behind a family that never seemed fully formed. It appears my father's parents were never married, and my father had an older brother, just a little more than a year his senior. But what became of their childhood and how they navigated through the absence of a father figure is lost in time. No one seems to know, or perhaps no one is willing to share. Adding another layer of complexity is the fact that my parents were involved in an interracial relationship during a time when such unions were not only frowned upon, but openly discriminated against. Their relationship began 8 years before interracial marriage was legalized in the United States. An added factor is that they were 15 and 16 years old. Society wasn't kind to couples like them, and it seems my father faced harsh repercussions because of his choice to be with my mother. The weight of racial injustice was not just an external burden, it was something that seeped into the very fabric of his life, shaping his choices and ultimately his destiny. From what little I've pieced together, my father's life was filled with struggle. It was marked by violence, instability, and repeated encounters with the criminal justice system. The man I was learning about was complex and troubled, perhaps shaped as much by his environment as by his own actions. Yet despite the turmoil that seemed to follow him, he is half the reason I exist. I yearn to understand him better, to find some meaning in his story, even in the broken places. My search led me to reach out to the family members I knew existed, hoping they might fill in some gaps. My paternal grandmother, whom I've never met, had married another man after her relationship with my biological grandfather, and together they had 3 more children, my aunts and uncle. I approached them, seeking to connect with my roots, to hear stories, to see photos, to find any link to the history that felt so intangible. But their answers were disheartening. When I asked about my father's history, I was met with a frustrating lack of information. "We don't know," they would say, or "we don't have any photos." There seemed to be no stories, no shared family traditions, no threads that tied us together. Even when I visited in person, my uncle stayed hidden away in his room, not emerging to greet me. Whether he was avoiding me or simply uninterested, I may never know, but it felt like yet another closed door in my search for connection. This quest has not only been about uncovering the past, but also about understanding what family truly means. The silence I encountered, the guardedness, and the blank spaces where stories should have been. It left me with a deep longing, a feeling of being unanchored. I was a child who grew up in the foster care system, and the more I searched, the more I wondered if these unanswered questions had been the beginning of that journey. Yet, amid the emptiness, I found a glimmer of hope in an unexpected place. In my search, I came across a slave narrative, a story passed down about my second great grandfather. He was a man who had endured the unimaginable, a slave in Virginia who was separated from his wife and two daughters when they were sold to another owner. Years later, after emancipation, he set out on a seemingly impossible quest to find them. With no resources, no money, and no means of transportation, he made his way to Blackville, South Carolina, a major hub for the slave trade, and then traveled 30 miles further to Aiken, South Carolina. Miraculously, he reunited with his wife, who had since remarried, and his now grown daughters, who were also married. This story was the first act of kindness and resilience I could connect to in my father's family. It was a flicker of hope, a piece of inheritance that reached through the generations. My second great-grandfather, through the suffering of slavery, found the strength to reconnect to the ones he loved. In that story, I saw a reflection of the qualities I strive to embody: compassion, emotional resilience, a sense of morality. These traits were handed down to me, not through the nurturing of a traditional family, but through the legacy of a man who demonstrated that love can be our greatest ally. His journey to reunite with his family gave me something to hold on to, a piece of history that felt real, that had a heartbeat. It reminded me that, despite the brokenness in my father's life and the uncertainty in my own, there is a thread of resilience that weaves through it all. It taught me that even in the darkest of circumstances, the drive to seek out connection and love can light the way forward. As I continue to walk this path, searching for answers that may never come, I carry that story with me. It is a reminder that even when the past is fragmented, we can find meaning in the search itself. I may never fully understand why I ended up in the foster care system or why so many doors remain closed, but I know that my journey is about more than just finding the answers. It's about finding myself and learning to draw strength from the stories of those who came before me, even if they are few and far between. In the end, my search for my parental history has become more than just a quest for information. It is a journey towards healing, toward making peace with the past, and toward embracing the legacy of resilience that has been passed down to me. I will keep walking this path with hope in my heart and the determination to uncover what I can, one step at a time. This week's guests are Danielle Skelly, adoptive foster mother and family advocate, and Joe's biological siblings, Tamisha Moore and Raheem Moore.
Welcome back to Out of the Starting Blocks and Into the Race. And in Joe's search for his paternal family, Danielle and I got the pleasure of joining this podcast and meeting Joe's siblings, and it was quite the ride for all of us. And that's what we're going to be discussing today and kind of getting Joe's input of what that ride was like for him.
Yeah, I'm super excited to kind of debrief this because there was just so much. And I don't know if the first time around I really appreciated how much was there. Joe, we want to start out with this idea of learning about your family and what it was like not having a family and then finding out that you had these siblings. So when you started your search, where did it begin for you, I guess? And what was something filled in by that, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, I guess first I want to say is I'm still sort of in a state of processing this whole interaction because it is an answer to that search, right? Because my search in my memory is forever. I always knew that I was in foster care. I always knew I came from somewhere, and I didn't really have that connection. So what I did was continued to dig and dig and dig and dig. Now, it has to be said that when I discovered my father's children, my biological brothers and sisters, that I was 30 years old. So this was like a 30-year journey. And really, it wasn't just a connection to them, but it was also a connection to the adults who I looked for answers from, who could give me some information. And so my oldest brother was just at the time 14 years old, and my sister was 12. So they were 12, 13, and 14. And so they weren't really going to give me the answers, right? The focus of my quest at that time was information, information, information. And they needed somebody to tell me about my beginning. Where, how did I get here? And why am I here? And first of all, I have to say that I felt so light after having this experience. I felt fulfilled, I felt calm, and I felt connected. It wasn't unexpected, but it wasn't really expected either. You know, the interaction that I had with my siblings through this podcast were just completely positive and calming, let's say.
I think the question that I have too, Joe, as I think about the process of you going through this search and when you did find out that you had these siblings, like what was that like for you when you first found that out?
Yes, it's sort of out of order, and we'll get to that when we get through sort of my journey through foster care. Is that I did meet a sister, a full biological sister, when I was in 10th grade, I believe. It's 10th or 11th grade. And so my only experience up to that time was not having any connection to my biological family. I tell you what, when I was young, I always used to imagine that I had a twin brother. And then when I met my sister, who looked like me, but was so incredibly different than me, the connection was difficult. I think it was difficult for both of us. And these siblings, I don't, there wasn't really a connection, not intentionally or with malice. It's just they weren't going to provide me with the answers to fill the emptiness that I had from being disconnected from my family.
Right.
If that makes any sense?
No, it does. But I guess my thought is that so now it's 36 years post that first meeting when they were 14 and 12. Is the emptiness filled?
When I think about the interaction, I smile and I love them. I don't know if that's a feeling. I'm just so happy to have connected to them and look forward to connecting more with them. In particular, my brother, who is so similar in his thoughts. And that was sort of just freaky. And, my sister, who's so strong. Like I admire them. I admire who they are and the things that they've done and the things that they've survived through. So yes, I look forward to connecting more, but the emptiness really wasn't a void. There is filled. Something is filled. Something is satisfied. Something has given me a sense of belonging. And I join with them in their isolated family. We're more alike than we are different.
How did it feel when they had claimed you to hear that when in one segment of it they shared that they claimed you, that you were always their brother, that their kids knew about you, and just that sort of experience that you spent 36 years not even realizing that you were claimed by a family, by these siblings who were so young, but you had all this time, how did it feel to hear that? It
Yeah.
was remarkable for me.
It was such an interesting question, and it's just been so complicated. And I think what we probably need to do is we probably need to let people in on the conversation a little bit before we start dissecting. So why don't we watch some of it and then we'll come back?
Great, let's do it. That was very impactful, Joe. And don't imagine that was an easy piece to write, but I think that it's an important piece and an important piece of your story. And I think it's amazing that we are here and you have your sister and your brother here to be able to kind of process this piece of our podcast and this piece of your story. I'm really curious of how it was for Tanisha to hear some of that and what kind of impacted you or the feelings that you kind of got from hearing them?
I mean, well, I remember meeting him, you know, when I was younger. I never knew about him until he popped up at our house. Like I tell him all the time, to me, I know it's probably been hard for him not knowing where he come from or who he came from, but I just feel like he didn't miss too much of anything to me. That's how I feel. Like he probably might be better off from what we experienced. He might have been better off not knowing all the things that we know and we experience.
That's one of the things that I remember that both Raheem and Tamisha had told me, and I'm 16 years older than Raheem. And how much older am I from you, Tamisha?
If you're 16 years older than him, 18 years older than me.
So I probably met them before I was 25, so that you guys were little.
Mhm.
And they both told me that you were lucky that you didn't grow up here. And this piece was hard to write because, you know, I had the opportunity to speak to Raheem just before this to ask him. And when we got off the phone, there's a big part of me that felt guilty. Guilty that I knew where they were. I knew how to reach. And I just hadn't. Like, I didn't have that. I mean, it was just a real sort of look what you missed out on, right? Like because of foster care, there was a disruption. I didn't have a relationship with my little brother or my little sister. And Raheem, I don't know if you remember the phone call, but when I got off the phone, I was like, he wanted this. The only thing I could think is you wanted the same things that I wanted, like answers. And it's like, he's just like me, like is what I was thinking. And I didn't get an opportunity to establish that relationship because of the disruption of foster care.
You know, it's crazy that you were in foster care, but we experienced everything that you experienced, but we wasn't in foster care. So, like,
Exactly.
Yeah, that's the other thing I was thinking about. It's because you guys shared, like, you know, I'm trying to bring some reality to this so people don't feel so alone. Like, and I know that a lot of things that kids go through in foster care, other people go through. But the piece that's so haunting, I guess, is that mine is sort of like a disconnection from family. Like even the experiences are the same. I didn't have, like, it wasn't mine, right? And
Right.
I know that this is not. It's going to sound ridiculous, but you at least had it. You had everything that you were experiencing was being experienced through your family, right?
Yeah, that was
And
my mother and my father.
right, as if that was magic, right? Like,
Yeah, but you're right. We experienced it with them, you know, with our parents, because we didn't have like family outside of them. Like we still are just our family. Like it's just me and my brothers.
everything that you guys tell me, it just keeps just echoing in my head. It's like the disconnection, the lack of family support.
But like we said, we don't know what it was about my father, but we were not kids that they wanted to be bothered with or be around. You know what I'm saying? Like we were like excluded from the family.
The reality is you guys should have been placed in foster care too.
I used to wish to be in foster care. I know that was horrible to think. I used to always think like, I want somebody to come take me away from this. I used to always think that. Like, and what made it even worse, when I turned 14, my mother put me out. I was just outside. Like that was it for me. It was just outside. You know, I learned life outside. I made a family outside. That's what I did.
At 14.
Yeah. Yeah. At 14, I had a couple of friends that would feed me here and there, but I went a lot of days without eating. I went a lot of days without nothing. You know what I mean? And honestly, nobody came to look for me. So I just was out. That's it. And I think that's made me who the person I am today. That's why I guess all the stuff is not so deep on me. I've been through a lot. You know what I'm saying? And like from where I came from, I'm doing just well. You know what I mean? I could have been a drug addict. I could have been a prostitute. I could have did a lot of things. I could have not been here now trying to rob and do things. And I never went that route. I never, you know what I mean? I still just fought to be a better person. That's it.
It's so incredible to me without like a real extended family structure.
Right.
And again, I see this theme here between all three of you, and it's that piece of strength. And there's this piece of good that I can see from just meeting Tamisha the first time and reading the first time and knowing Joe. I see this connection between the three of you that's, I'm just like, oh my gosh, like this is really happening. And this is piece of everyone's story, but the good and the connection. And this is impactful for me to be witnessing and watching and hearing, knowing Joe and now meeting you two. I just feel that overwhelming connection and I see it, and it's very impactful. And I think so often in stories like this, and then when you reconnect, I think Raheem had said that in the beginning of, Joe was in foster care and you guys were going through what you were going through, but there was these feelings of connection there still, right? And Tamisha, I just want to validate you in what you were saying about there was times that you wished that you were in foster care.
Yeah.
Because I remember as a young girl wishing the same thing. And I do believe that's why I do what I do for a living. And I want to be a part of the foster care and kids and youth that are in it, and do whatever I can to advocate and bring stories like this to a place where there is this family that are connected in so many different ways.
It makes me angry because I'm 1,000% certain that he wouldn't have liked me, because everything that he stood for, I've worked against. To think that he's at a minimum neglecting, at the most abusing my siblings, it makes me mad. It makes me sad. I'm okay with my history, right? Similar to what you're saying, Tamisha. It's like I'm over it. When I hear stuff happen to you guys, and even though I didn't grow up with you, that makes me mad.
Yeah, just imagining it. Like,
Yeah.
but like, I feel like you dodged the bullet. You know what I'm saying? I don't know how you grew up in foster care. I don't know if you went through anything in that, but it couldn't have been no better tool. We was living like it. You know what I mean?
You had said that to me, and I thought about it, and I think I agree with you. I think I would have been in a worse position if
Yeah.
I had
Because
been.
he said my father hated him. You know what I'm saying? I probably was his golden child, but it's only because, you know what I mean, I was small, I was able to take and get what he needed. You know what I mean? And that's why I was the golden child. Like, that's it. He took me out to steal every day. I stole every day. They would leave me where I was at after I gave them all the stuff that I stole. So I don't know, I don't think nobody was a favorite.
I think people do need a platform for things like this. And I thought about the same thing you're saying right now a long time ago. Everybody processes trauma different. One person can be strong about it. One person can be extremely weak about it, or weak-minded about it. And some people just lash out with other people because they don't know what to do with that emotion. That is something else in me and Joseph that talk about. He was telling me about the rage he feels when he gets mad. And I share that rage with him. You could put me and Joseph probably in the same situation, and they both want to react totally different to it. And that's the scary part.
I think what's striking me the most is I just think this like generational trauma that's gone so back far in your family impacted the three siblings in very different environments, but in a very similar way. And that's I'm just trying to kind of wrap my mind around this idea that like no matter whether you were raised with them or you were removed from them, this generational trauma still very much impacted you all. And the situation didn't necessarily matter because the trauma just perpetuated on both sides.
I want to switch, if we can, and talk about the impact of your meeting with your brother and sister. That initial feeling of when we were all first met and you're seeing them and we're all on screen and we're having these conversations. And the thing that I noticed the most is that you're strangers, but you were thinking the same things. Like, how did it feel to be so connected to these two people when essentially you were strangers? And there's this connection that happens between the three of you that clearly Danielle and I could see happening when we were having this discussion and having these conversations. How does that impact you knowing that you're so connected to what essentially were strangers?
Well, first of all, I mean, I was nervous. I was really uncomfortable because I didn't know what was going to happen. And I think in my history with that side of the family, with all the family, is that there's always that chance for rejection. And I think I anticipate that more than the times when I have been just excited about the possibility of a connection and have been let down. In fact, hurt, just downright hurt by sort of the rejection. But as we kept talking, they were just such good siblings, right? They were taking care of me. They were always assuring me that I was thought of and kept in their thoughts, and the story of me was passed down. They were like proud, not something that I was really expecting. Like, it's such a good feeling, but foreign, that like they didn't even know me. But the sense of like sort of blood is thicker than water has no meaning to me, and it to them it's like, oh no, you're our brother and we know who you are and we're proud of you. There's a part of that thing that you always carry when you're in foster care, but I'm not worthy, wanting to push that away because you don't feel like you deserve it. And, now I'm an adult and I don't have to push it away and I don't have to be afraid of it. And it just feels so good to have a space to belong in a place that's where I came from, right? I don't know how to explain it any more than that.
Well, I think you did a damn good job explaining that, because you used two phrases like, that fear of being pushed away, but then you had the ability to embrace it as it was happening. And that's one thing I know that I saw. And it wasn't just you embracing that, both your sister and brother and you embracing it all at the same time. And by listening and hearing what they were having to say too, of course, there's also that kind of like little fear of rejection as well, right? But when you all came together, it wasn't all fear-based. It was more of that embracing.
And it was so natural, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely
it
was.
wasn't
Yes.
hard. It wasn't scary. It wasn't anything that I could have imagined, because I think I entered into that space with the mind of the child that I was. And he was afraid of like being
Right.
rejected. I mean, I
Right.
don't have a split personality, but if but I do carry those memories and those thoughts and those feelings aren't going away. They stay with me, and I embrace them as opposed to burying them. So I guess a part of that fear is being vulnerable to open up, and I think that they did the same thing. Those are my siblings. We responded and reacted the same, and I'm just so proud that I come from a group of people that I belong to, people who are like me, like I found them.
When I was coming into this, knowing that y'all had never really had a conversation, I expected it to be very awkward, and it was awkward for about 3 seconds. And then it became so natural and so fluid and so comfortable that I was like, there's no way that these people haven't known each other for their whole lives. It was not 3 strangers. It was 3 siblings that were clearly interacting on the screen. And I think I was a little shocked by that. I expected it to be a little bit more awkward. It left me speechless to just sit here and watch this just family exists, and to know that like an hour before it only existed on paper on some level
36
was,
years between the time that I saw them
yeah,
last.
which is a lifetime. That's a lifetime.
There was such a lack of information about family and the connection there, which I can identify even without being in foster care. But I really want to take a listen to the reactions and responses to that.
I understand that our grandmother had a husband after our grandfather, and those siblings did not embrace me at all. Not that I
You're
was
telling me something new, because I don't know nothing about that. Like when you tell me that my grandmother, married another man or got with I don't know nothing about that. Like I didn't know that I didn't really know who my grandfather was.
Lazarus
Honestly, I knew my
Lazarus
grandmother.
Lazarus
Yeah.
Harrison
Yeah,
is
I
not.
see it on my father's death certificate. So that's
Yeah.
how I know. But I never heard of him. I never heard anything about him. Nobody never spoke of him. Like I met
Can
my
I say,
grandmother. I remember meeting my grandmother maybe a few times, like maybe 2 or 3 times, and then she passed away.
2 or 3 times. How old were you? Do you remember how old you were when that
I
happened?
was very young. I was little.
Right.
Because remember, I told you that my aunt, they didn't really want to be bothered with us, but somehow I ended up over there seeing my grandmother. I remember sitting on her lap. Well, she had no legs. You know, she was in a wheelchair. I remember that, but that's all I remember.
Mm.
Like, that's it. I don't even think my brothers remember that because I just was remember
I
my.
actually will.
You do?
When the ball during all the probably better than vegan. All right, so you remember the conversation me and you used to have when I was at jog. Or really, it developed up a lot after we spoke because, like you said, I was feeling the same way you was feeling. Once I got off the phone with you, I said, "Yo, we'd never read each other. Same exact feelings for us to never have met. You have the same exact real feeling, everything." And I felt bad that we didn't know who you were. And I felt bad for the fact that you had to go up and foster care and get to know who your brother and sisters or who your father was. We felt the same way he did. After we found out you existed, you never had a thought in our head where we saying like, that's not our brother. And we wanted you to come around more, and I wish you had.
I didn't know how. You guys were young, and I didn't have connections to like the adults. Now, your mother was nice. We had contact, but everybody else was so weird. They talked around me when I was there. One of asked me an unanswerable question: how does it feel to have a white mother?
I don't know. I just feel like our family have so much trauma. It's just like continuation of trauma.
Similar to you, I mean, you shared a little bit both sides, right? It's like
Yeah.
trauma begets trauma. It's like they're magnets to each other. So
It's serious.
yeah.
I used to think, I told you, when I was little, I used to always think, like, when am I going to be happy? Or, like, even when I got a little older, like, when is my happiness coming? Like, when am I going to feel, like, happy? Like,
Yeah.
without all the extraness.
I felt like one of the things I used to think is that I was cursed.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
We all
what,
felt like
that's what
that.
I'm saying. Like, I felt like when am like all this is gonna be lifted off me, and it just light goes like like I want it to go. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, I know. Yeah, Raheem. So we and Raheem always say we was cursed. Like,
Yeah.
like we just got bad blood on us, and like how we get to create the curse off? How we break
Right,
it? Like,
exactly.
I always go back to genetics, and I always say it to my sister. My sister gave mad at me sometime about this. Poor sister gets mad about you say this. Everything is laying in your DNA. On my head, everything weighs, it rises in your DNA. How can we all think the same way and not we never discussed this? It's so funny. It's just the first time we discussed it, it's exactly the thing.
So again, that kind of leads us into this who are we thing. I think what, the big debate or thing that always comes up, and especially in adoption, is this like nature versus nurture. And to me, there was no debate because clearly genetically there was just so many of these ties. And there was one part where your sister said, my mom always said he was a really good man, when we were talking about sort of this goodness in all of you. And how did it feel to have some validation around who you are in context of this bigger picture?
I think, when she was mentioning that, she was referring to her mother talking about our father. And like my siblings, she may have seen something that we did not see. I never met the man, so but I do know from his history of things that he has done or accused of being done. And I would love to see that. I'll tell you what, when I was doing my search and I started hearing things about my father, I didn't like him. Most of the things that I was doing in my professional life were to fight people like that. And what I did was I went to the high school that he attended, and I tried to find images in the yearbook, and they're not clear images, and they're small, and it was, I guess, printing was a whole lot different then. But my father was in the band. I was in the band, and he was also in, I think, the Spanish club, which is one of the things that I did. I had to see my father as a child before I could pull down the walls and accept that he had a beginning and that he had a history from somewhere. I don't know what happened to turn him into who he became. I think there's history that might explain some of that, but I had to see him as a child. And when I saw him as a child, I was able then to at least open my mind to trying to find out more.
You and your brother have some really obvious similarities in your personality, and you discussed this idea of rage. And I'm curious as to what the experience was like for you to hear some of your deepest emotions being sort of mirrored in this other person. Because I mean, there were some really intimate parts of that interaction.
I mean, that was so cool because I was worried about, I think part of the acceptance piece is wanting to be cool enough, wanting to be good enough, wanting to be perfect enough. I mean, he's a self-proclaimed sort of nerd. He was free to talk about his emotions, and I didn't have to be somebody else. I guess from foster care and everywhere that you travel, from school to homes, you can't be yourself, right? You have to be bigger. And I was one of those people that was seen that way. Like I was good. And I mean, it turns out that I think that's who I am, and it worked out well for me. But it was always about what could screw that up. Like, so I needed to be liked. I needed to be accepted in every place and every space. And I wasn't always, because I wasn't cool enough. I think we would have gotten along famously as brothers, and it's like we would have been similar. And I think that the way he talked about his relationship with his father, those feelings were coming up for me during my search about him. He also said that those qualities that I value in myself and that I value in him didn't make for a good relationship with our father. And I had already thought that my father wouldn't have liked me because of those qualities. And so, too bad. Like I love that we have those qualities in common.
Yes, and you could see them. Again, I can't say enough about what it was like to watch all of this as public, like the spectators, like and watching it all unfold. And it was like 3 seconds of us being together, and it was just kind of all of a sudden just started to flow. And watching all of this happen and watching that connection and watching you go through the conversation and just the trauma that you've all been through, the impact that you all had meeting together, and then who you were in all of this transitional stuff. And then you come to those similarities. Danielle and I both spoke about it was so impactful for us. It had to have been so impactful for you, obviously, going through and
Well,
hearing this.
well, yeah. I mean, I talk a lot about identity formation, and I now feel like my identity has been formed by a well that is part of my family. My brother got his identity from that well as well. Do you know what I mean? I don't.
Yeah, no,
It,
that's not even something I thought about. But now that you say it, I'm like, yeah, like it's almost like a validation of your identity on some
Right.
level.
right.
Like that this is who I was meant to be. Like I didn't have to create
I,
this, but
it's that
genetically it was in there.
it's that nature thing, and he's really
Yeah,
big on the genetics. He
yeah.
was really probably taken back more than me, and it was just a validation for the way that he thinks. And with that thought, because I had the same feelings when I discovered information about my father, when I shared information with him about my father, it was upsetting to him, because if that's our well, what does that say about me? Despite that, there was a stronger potion, or whatever you want to call it, in that well that we both drank from the same side of the lake, right?
Yeah.
But I'll tell you what, I remember when I first met them, there were some issues going on, and I was at least in a position to try to help clear them up. What came out in me was my cape. It fell fell out, and I tried to help in a situation that I was so unfamiliar with. The situations were things that I could help with. Professionally, I was working, I was doing advocacy systems, and I thought that, well, it is my responsibility. And he spoke a little bit about this too, as being the oldest child in the house. It was my responsibility as the oldest sibling to right the wrongs of our father. And he echoed that, like, as the oldest child in the house, it was his job to protect his siblings from our father. I don't know how you dismiss that. It was just so similar. One of the things that strikes me so much is that through what we were saying, how we were feeling, how we were describing our feelings, the questions that you and Danielle were asking really, really lean heavy into how information impacts how we feel about ourselves and how we think about ourselves. And so, the whole concept of identity formation, which is what I continually talk about, is impacted by good and bad, by information, lack of information, and the information that we sort of create to fill in the blanks. My focus while I was in foster care when I was young was always on finding my mother. And that's probably because my father that I grew up with wasn't really warm and fuzzy anyway. The responsibility for caring for kids is always placed on the mothers, right? So,
Yeah, really.
and I tell everybody, no matter how old a man gets, when he's in the most dire straits, he's always wants his mommy. So I didn't have a whole lot of information about our father, and I wasn't interested, not for any reason. But then when I started getting information, and I think, Raheem, you talked a little bit about this too. It's like the more I find out about him, or at least when I was younger, it was like, who am I? If that's my father, who am I? Like, I didn't like that identity. I didn't like thinking about, I came from, whatever. Like, and it's,
You know what's bad? Oh, I'm sorry to cut you off. I didn't know half the things that I know now. So, I mean, honestly speaking, after hearing it, I think I felt most about the situation. I actually came home with a pride about it. It gathered me a lot.
and then what he's talking about is I was sharing information, really thinking that you guys already knew everything that I knew, and you didn't. So that was another thing that made me feel bad, Raheem. It was that I was like the bearer of this news, and I knew how it impacted me, and then I could hear it in your voice how it was impacting you.
I believe in genetics so badly. Like, even when me and you spoke and we had similar feelings, I was just like, this is crazy. This is all genetics. You not knowing where you coming from, or sharing DNA with somebody and not knowing that they feel the same exact way you feel, but not around you. Plus, they never have met. Plus, they feel the same way. To me, was crazy. So now, when you tell me that, I'm like, do I have this in me? That's the scariest part. Knowing what I know, it's scared me. And I told my sister, I said, that's not something to be proud of in my heart. I've been some type of way about that. I still be with you. I've been trying to process that ever since we spoke. And that's another reason why I didn't call you back that day, because I really was trying to process that information after him.
You said something like as simple as, who am I? Like that was, that hit hard, because all of this information that I'm collecting to try to like
piece your life together and tell us about it. You're also piecing our life together because we don't know about it.
And I don't necessarily like being in that position. like I don't see, and so that's the whole thing about fitting in. I don't know you guys, right? I'm like, I could talk to people that I've known for years and just pick up from where I left off. And the information is just the information. I don't know your sensitivities. I don't know your desire for the information. And so that in itself creates like a boundary. Like, do I say something? Do I not say something? And we haven't really gotten to talk, but it's just a thing that stops me from just fully communicating. The last thing I want to do is I don't want to make anything harder on either of you.
Oh, look what you've done. You know what I'm saying? You took a lot of things and you made them not feel the way you felt. You know what I'm saying? You are a strong person. I mean, as much as you want to know, you're still a great person. You didn't have to know anybody. Okay? Like that's it.
Well, yeah, but it's always in the back of your mind. It's like, all right, where did I get this? Because I grew up in a house with 4 different foster brothers. So they weren't biologically related to me. My foster parents had 2 kids, and I was so different from all of them. So
you weren't
like,
right.
Where did I get this? Like,
That sounds like Raheem. Raheem would say that. Like, I was different from everybody.
I know.
Like,
I hear him. He messed me up the other day when he said that.
And it's crazy. Before y'all talked, he used to always say that. Like, oh, you and Marquise was okay, but I was the one. He always said that. I was the one who felt lost. I was the one who felt like I wasn't a part of y'all, whatever he would say. Like, but he was, he was our father for a while. When I was hungry, we'll go to him. And when we wanted things, we would tell him. And, like, that's what that was.
You guys are strong. I didn't have the same kinds of issues. And I don't know how I would have, maybe I would have adjusted and done it, but thinking about having to do it is like I've never had to try to
hard that could have been, right? Like,
well, you survived.
Not having clothing and, not have no lights and We have to go steal to eat for the night, and there's all kind of stuff we went through.
Because you knew something, you don't know what you can take, and so you have to take it. And being a team, dude, we share the same genetics. You might have been able to persevere through that stuff too.
Go into the similarities that you have with your siblings after 36 years and having this conversation. That was another thing that Danielle and I talked about was we were absolutely blown away by the similarities amongst all three of you, not just your brother and you, your sister, you and your brother, all three of you, the similarities that you had. And I know that we kind of touched on it a little bit, but there was that statement and both of them said it more than once. That's our brother. That's my brother. And hearing that, Joe, after 36 years, my heart just filled up because I could see how it was also impacting you. And I kind of like you to kind of touch back and reflect back on that as they were both saying it. And like I said, they just didn't say it once, and how her children knew about you and they talked about our older brother, and you're our brother. You're our family.
Yeah, I mean, outside of the stuff that I've already said about that, there was some sadness about that, right? There was some sense of loss. I mean, my brother really, the conversation we had before the podcast, he called me right away. What messed me up was that he's like, I've always been thinking about you and hoping that you're okay. My memory of how old he was when I met him was off. I thought I was closer in age to him, but he was 14 years old and he was thinking about me. And what was so emotional about that conversation was like somebody was thinking about me. Like I had spent a lifetime thinking about generic family, just who are they, thinking about the concept and those people from which I, loins I came from, right? And there was my brother who was thinking about me, that had remembered our short visit, and they held on to that. They held on to that. So I don't know what they saw, right? And because it wasn't lengthy and all at all. I don't know if I saw him twice even. I know I saw Tamisha twice at least, but he saw something that resonated with him. Just to have somebody thinking about you is just, not that people haven't, right? But this was,
Right.
remember,
Right.
this was the void of biological beginnings, family. Somebody out there was thinking about me. And of course, in my young mind, that was always like, I wonder if my mother's thinking about me, right? Does she remember that it's my birthday? Like those things that no matter how much love you're receiving from everybody else, I don't know how those things don't always pop up.
Well, I also think about how you were in foster care and they were in the family. Still, you have so many similarities and so much connection with both of them, even though you were in foster care and they were in a family. And that was the other part that I found to be so incredibly dynamic about the connection in itself, was that even those experiences that you had separately were so much alike, and there were so many feelings there that you all could connect on.
I think we have the same strength. I think we use it a little differently, but I think it's really our superpower. Yeah, I'm going to just guess this, that I'm the more emotional one, just in contrast to my sister, who is just so strong. She's just so focused that she is able to navigate her strength without emotion sort of getting in the way. I don't know that that's fair. Like but she, at least in this meeting, she's just so focused on her goal. And I think my brother and I are very similar, probably in the way that we process our feelings because of his experiences of growing up in a more violent family situation. It's probably easier for him to go into that space and be angry about it. Whereas me, I was in foster care, so I couldn't be angry, because if I was angry, then I was bad. So I have more control probably over my emotional response. We both agree that it takes energy to not get angry, but if we ever do, it's unleashed. That's certainly true for me. Very few times I just know that it's true. It's like I get angry that you made me angry. And that I get angry that you made me lose control. And so then it just sort of pours out. Probably got more control over and more intentional. I think he's unfortunately used to navigating it more frequently than I was. One of the questions people have asked me that I've talked to after this, just to tell them what was going on, is like, did you think that you were better off in foster care? And the answer is yes, I do. So I don't feel a regret for not growing up with them. I feel a regret for not being there to help them. I mean, I was old enough at that time. They should have been removed. And I certainly was working in preventive services. I may have been even at that time working in foster care, which only highlights how strong they are. Because,
Right.
man, they went through some crap. So my life was like Shangri-La compared to theirs.
Well, I don't know if it was Shangri-La, but again, there was another one of those similarities is that each one of you held that strength within you. Yes, different past trauma, but both tough roads and tough paths.
Mhm.
And you mentioned, Joe, how, your sister was so strong and she just kept moving forward and kept that strength within. That's the same thing that you did
Yeah, that's
on your
exactly what I
path.
was thinking.
Yeah, but I think she just yields it a little more effectively than I do. And
That
so
that could be a male female thing.
there was something about the way that she carried herself that I admired. That's why I thought we're very similar in the fact that we have that strength, but I admired the way that she at least presented it.
Well, I'm going to throw in here that I admire the way that you handle your strength and present your strengths too, because I know you and we've been talking about your path in foster care and your journey, and I admire that strength within you, just as you admire that strength in your sister. Sitting outside here and looking in, you need to know that from me personally.
Oh,
That
thank you, Renee. And Danielle, because I'm sure Danielle feels the same way. But you know how good I am at accepting the positive reinforcement.
What else kind of struck me about similarities between you and your sister in particular? Because I think the similarities between you and your brother are very, very obvious, more obvious on some level. But the one thing that struck me is that you and your sister are both action oriented, right? Like she just takes control of the situation, sees what action she can do. And you are also very similar. Like
Mhm.
when you talk about this search and you're action oriented and like, okay, what can I proactively do to get to the other side of that? And it's very sort of action oriented in your problem solving.
Yes, I know when that was born in me. So, yeah, I am very action oriented. And it's a experience that I'll share as we go chronologically through my placement in foster care, where I'll talk about, despite the situation, the birth of that. That's the positive outcome of that situation.
What keeps striking me, and I don't know if I'm going to have the words correctly, but like, to go back to the nature and nurture thing, like I almost feel like you three didn't allow the lack of nurture to outdo your nature. Like almost your adversity made all these positive nature attributes rise to the surface, right? Where it really is a situation where this negative disturbances in your lives, whether it be going into foster care, being separated, all the trauma that they went through in their childhood, it really made all these positive natural strengths that are genetically clearly in there rise to the top. And that was really striking for me, is that, out of the three of you, where it could have went a very different way, right? The outcome could have been very, very different, that all these negative, lack of nurture, traumatic events could have changed the trajectory. For the three of you, it really rose the trajectory to these powerful, powerful strengths that you utilize.
That's an interesting point, right? I think that my father missed that lesson. But if you think about let's isolate me for a second. I am born of survivors. Podcast before was all about my mother's family's trauma history. And there's clearly trauma history in my father's side of the family. And the question is, how do you get it? Right. And so my sister, who we'll talk about in a later podcast, did not get it. Most of us have gotten that, right? So from my mother's side of the family, there are fewer people who have been able to sort of tap into that survivor, action-oriented, let's move forward. And then on my father's side of the family, there are those that I could clearly identify too, my father being one of them, that wasn't able to tap into the good side of that, the positive attributes of being a survivor. And I think that goes back to a conversation we had about buttons and how come some buttons can be turned off in some people and some can't be, or even adjusted, right? So when put in a situation where you're under duress, how do you level that off so that you can function? And I think that for me, that's one of my strengths, is that I can adjust and put myself in a place where I can manage and navigate the situation. And it certainly sounds like my brother and sister can do that as well, as opposed to leaning into the chaos and responding to the chaos and letting the chaos capture you and take over your actions and your reactions.
I also think about, because it did come up, this idea of race and some of these transracial pieces and stuff. And it's like, I also wonder if, like, generationally, social supports, from the standpoint of social supports for your dad, where he was born, did he have access to the same nurture and social supports that through your journey you had, whether it be school or education or being raised in the family that you were raised in, all of these complex things. And then your siblings being raised in a generation that they were raised in, the availability of social supports for them that maybe, created this makeshift scaffolding that wasn't available to your dad to help some of these better characteristics bloom. I don't know, but it remains to be seen, only because we talk about what's the solution, right? And
Right. Well,
that
you're
makes
talking
me
about
think.
community, which you brought up, remember, in one of the past podcasts. Is
Yeah.
did your community enable you to thrive?
Yeah.
And in my father's case, and I'm going to say it this way, but obviously throughout any context, is that he was allowed to drop out of school. His father was absent. I don't know how much that impacted him. I know that his mother at some point lost her legs from this podcast, right? I don't know how much that impacted him. The relationship between he and my mother was messy at a minimum from the outsider's perspective. It was 1959 on Long Island. And my father was also one of the other things that was striking when I went back to look at the yearbook, is my father was clearly African American. When I looked at the pictures of the yearbook, the town that he grew up in today is predominantly a minority town. It was not when he was in school. So he stood out. I mean, I was shocked because I grew up next to that town and was familiar with that town, and it didn't look anything like the town that I knew. So his generation, that he was absolutely a minority in terms of numbers. When you look at the pictures, like, what in the world? Like, so there was a big transformation in the town that he lived in. So, and his family, what I do know is that his family had a long history of aid to families, so public assistance. Now, what brought this so much closer is that just that generation ago, they were much closer to slavery. But when I was finding out this information, there were still people that were at least the children of former slaves that were in my family tree that were alive. And I never thought of slavery being that close. Right. It was a story that we heard. And although there were some incidents when I was growing up around race, I mean, when it just blows my mind that when my parents were involved, and I don't think marriage was even an issue, but it was illegal in this country to have an interracial marriage. So
Yeah.
I think there was a void of community, right? If community was the answer, and I keep thinking about that conversation that we had, how do we create these communities?
Yeah.
I grew up in a place where I would have been an outcast if I had dropped out of school. I grew up in a place that I would have been an outcast if I had been involved in the criminal justice system. I did everything to fit into my society, to my community, and the expectations of the community kept me on the right track. It was there. And I wasn't a rebel. So I didn't break rules. I I wanted to maintain a place in my community, more so probably because I was in foster care and I just needed it to fit in, and I needed people to like me because I didn't like myself based on my foster care experience. That's a complicated conversation that we can,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but I think you hit on something, Danielle, in the past podcast about, I keep thinking about, if it's that simple to I remember my response. If that's the answer, then look what we're missing out on, the ability to build community, because I think it's absolutely essential and possible to build community for people who feel disenfranchised.
Well, so this also brings me back to something we had discussed, is this idea of, in your adulthood, both you and your sister, you all shared this building of community, right? Like, that is how you created your family, was by building this community of, wayward teens on some level that you headed up, in that way. And your sister talks about how she had friends that would feed her when she was put out at 14, and how she's raised a granddaughter, and this idea of community. And your brother shared how he's such an active participant in his son's lives and the influence there. So like this concept of a positive, influential community, it's clearly something that is in nature in your family.
It's what's so strange is that for me it's sort of the dream state, right? Like as a child, I used to dream about, and obviously there were lots of images that were thrown at me from television and everything, but we value family. In dysfunctional families, we value the ideal of family, and we had to create that for ourselves.
Tamisha, you were sharing about Raheem's kids, and then you were sharing about your granddaughter and your children, and how Joe's family came together. And I just think of people who came from such fractured families value family so much.
Mhm.
Like that's the interesting piece, is that the curse has to be broken, because this is the complete and other opposite of what brought you to where y'all were in the family of origins that you came up in, was this fracture. And not one of you have discussed fractures within your own family. You've been intentional and invested and raising amazing children and taking on grandchildren, and Joe bringing his family together the way he brought his family together. Like, y'all prioritized family above all else, which it sounds like wasn't what it was. So I mean, I feel like I don't know, the curse is broken, because you did the work. Y'all did the work. I have to echo some of what Renee said, because to me, this is like watching three siblings. If I didn't know the story, I wouldn't know, because your interaction is so comfortable and so fluid and so relatable. I'm really just sitting here thanking you for letting me watch this, because it's just amazing.
I told Joseph the last time I told him, I said, since I met you, you always been my brother.
Right.
Always been my brother. I always say I have a brother, even though I didn't see him, I have an older brother.
It's funny because my kids knew about you.
Yeah, my kids knew about you. I used to tell my kids, I have an
My
older
kids
brother,
know
you have an
about
older
you.
uncle. I did.
Listening to Joe and Raheem, and then even Tamisha speak, is this idea that like there's so much goodness in all of you. And obviously I know you pretty well, Joe, but there's this like overwhelming kindness. And clearly that had to have come from somewhere. So although there was all this trauma and drama and negative things, this goodness and kindness about you that you clearly share. And that had to have come from your father also.
My mother said my father was a good man. My mother said when she met my father
Always said that.
at 14, he was a good man. He was a generous man. He took care of her. And we just never seen that part of him. That's all. I'm sure.
Really important for me, because this is what I've wanted, for you guys to point out and identify how similar we are, is just doing so much for me, because I didn't have it. And I like that we share the things that you're saying that we share. That's my family.
It's not that you didn't have it. You just didn't know you had it. That's the bad part. You always had it.
And
Yeah.
Raheem, whatever you did, your son, every time I see him posting or what he has to say on Facebook, I'm just so proud of him.
Yeah, he's very smart. He's a very good guy. All around guy. Like, seriously.
He reminds me of what I hope I am. I wish I was that way when I was his age, but
I know, right? Because he's so young. He's a great father.
yeah.
You know, he's a provider. You know, and he was weird and quirky like his daddy. So, like, I mean, all his kids, all Raheem's sons are like him, except for the little one. He's a little mouthy, but the rest of them are like quiet, and then like Raheem was. And look at them. Now I think of whatever I went through, I try my best not to ever do that to anybody else. I don't know. That's my feeling about it. Like I never want to be that person to anybody. Okay. And I'll never want to see nobody. I would never put my kids in the street. I would never want them to go through anything that I went through. You know what I'm saying? I don't want them to do without food, stuff like that. Never. So I make it my business. And my brothers and you spoil them, you spoil them. I don't know if that's called spoil, but it's called living well to me. I don't know.
I mean, my sister talks about when is everything going to be happy?
And is everything going to be happy? And when is the curse going to be over?
Right. And I think that part of what we have done is sort of moved towards this construct that we have developed in our mind. And I don't think we'll ever be happy. We're not going to find out what our dream was, because I don't know that that really exists. But that was the motivation to move in a direction that was more positive than negative. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? And I don't know how you come from situations like we did and want to do that. We're leaning into the concept of family and everything that it brings forth, whereas we all came from clown shows like that were that they were we really did. I mean, it's good, bad, or indifferent. They were not anything like, Father Knows Best, or the shows that I watched, Leave It to Beaver, or as I got older,
Right.
the Brady Bunch, and then and watching those shows, for me at least, there was some heartache because it was so different. What it did was it developed in me an intention that whatever I was experiencing, it was not going to happen again. And that's exactly what my sister said.
Yes, it is.
I'm not going to be like that. And that's a combination of resilience, right? And active dreaming. Many kids that I work with, they don't have that capability to actively dream. They're so bound by the presence that there's less hope that they can view. And we've got this separation of folks in the society based on situations, based on the activities that we participate in now. So we're very much less involved in community activities than they were when I was young. I remember we used to go to, I can't even believe it, Friday night, square dances. That used to be a thing. It was fun to go to. I know I have pleasant feelings of it. I didn't think about doing that now. Like, I can't tell my kids, we're going to go
Right.
square dancing this weekend. It's like, and this was based in the school. School was a really important symbol of community and family for me. Although it highlighted what I was missing, it certainly gave me a vision of what I wanted.
So, you watch Facebook and all these memes and all these things that come up, right? And I'm not advocating, but Matthew McConaughey had like a short on, and I just used it in another group that I was in. And he talks about the idea of happiness being the destination, but joy being the journey. And I almost feel like the three of you have found joy in the journey, right? Because you've stayed present in every action, every movement, rather than hanging on the destination. You've really found joy in the journey.
Yeah, I don't know if it's joy, if it's
And I think
don't
you
know.
could replace it with any word.
No, but
yeah.
I don't know if it's a joyful journey. There's joy in putting separation between the pain and the future.
Yes, right, exactly.
Moving away from that situation, being capable of.
Yeah.
And my sister talks about, when is everything going to be perfect? For a lot of people, if I can't meet my perfection, then I can't move. I'm not going to do anything. That's not her. That's not me. That's not Raheem.
Yeah, you keep moving forward to achieve whatever that is, whatever that perfection is.
Right.
Is that.
But it also goes down just to like the simplest thing is just doing what's good. And that's what I heard in all three of you as well. When Just that I'm not going to let someone go hungry, and I'm not going to let this happen, and I'm not going to let this happen. And just that overall kindness and goodness. And I know when your sister talked about, when are we just going to be happy? And when is this curse going to go away? And I think in the midst of doing all that and having these conversations, that curse is gone away and going away because of the goodness and because of the kindness and watching this all come together. And in spite of all the things that all three of you went through on your different paths with the trauma and the history of everything. All three of you had that I just want to do good and I just want to do the right thing and help people. And I heard that in your brother and your sister as well, is that piece. And I think that's when I blurted out, like, yeah, well, this is the way the curse goes away. This is the way the curse ends, is having these conversations and hearing the kindness and the joy and the happiness and watching a family come together and connect in such a way that was absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, I think that in terms of what you just laid out there, Renee, is that I think there are people that can get to a place and then relax. I think because of the situations that we were raised in, we're never going to relax. In that regard, I'm thinking of it less of a curse, but we're always going to move. We're always going to be action oriented, and we have to keep moving because we're really running away from the trauma that we lived. And if we stop and reflect, or it'll catch back up. I'm thinking of that from my perspective because people yell at me all the time. Why don't you just relax? Or they tell me what they think I should be doing because that's what they would do. That's how I ended up with 8 kids. I mean, there were 4, and then I had an opportunity to do just that, to just relax and take care of myself. And I have to be actively moving and doing good. I have to be producing and positivity and whatever it is, that's not a curse. That it has now become a mission, and it's one that I cannot relinquish.
And I totally understand and I totally identify with it and relate to it and am on that same path. And no, I was never in foster care. And no, but I'll tell you my background of trauma, and that is it. You just nailed it. I just want to keep going and I just want to do good. And I want to be so far away from the trauma of what back then formed my identity. And being so far away from that and reaching out and doing the things that we are doing in regards to this podcast and kids in foster care systems and all of the things that I just want to continue to do good and to do the next right thing and bring it with kindness and peace and positivity. So I completely understand wanting to stay so far away from that trauma. And it's just the drive behind what we do now.
That all resonates with me, just from the point of view of, if I don't keep moving forward, am I allowing the negativity to win, right? That if I'm moving forward, I have the ability to affect some amount of positive change, as small or as big as it is. No one can ever claim that I was complacent. And I refuse to allow complacency to be the reason why something doesn't work out well. If I can do something, I'm going to make sure it's positive.
With that said, and I'm sure you're going to agree, if somebody were to say that you were complacent, that's like an insult.
Oh, gosh.
It's like, so it has to do with our identities, right? It is who we are. And we have to be true to that for people that are true to themselves, right? And that's where we find fulfillment. Things get in the way, but don't challenge my identity that I have on myself with something that I think is negative, right? Because it'll never happen again, first of all. It only activates us. It's like, you did this. It's like, and God forbid it be true, right? And or that
or
you
have some root in some reality, right? Like,
right.
okay, so I'll give you an ounce of that, but I'm not wearing the whole thing because I'm going to make sure I change it.
You will never think that or say that to me ever again. Yes, I totally get it.
There was so much about this whole podcast and so many different dynamics and family and the connection and disconnection and similarities that we could probably spend another hour, 2 hours, 6 more podcasts just looking at all of that. And getting ready to wrap all of this up and just how impactful it was for all of us to be a part of this.
Yeah, I appreciate this process. It's almost like I don't want to say goodbye, right?
Mhm.
We're in the middle of it and I don't want to give it up, but there is always an end to things. So
There is. Let's listen. I feel like that curse that you're all mentioning, this is a part of breaking. It
Right.
really is. This is a piece of that breaking of that curse, breaking of that. What's the word I'm looking for? That
Well, shedding light on it, right?
Yeah.
Bringing it into the sunshine and talking about it. And
talking about it, because so many people are so afraid of this and afraid to do this, but this is a piece of that healing. This is a piece of that breaking that curse. And all I can think about when you were saying that, Tamisha, was you're doing it now. You asked for it. Guess what? It's here. You know, like it's happening authentically, organically, in real time. We're all present. We're all here. We're all having this conversation. And again, you know, Danielle said it as well. I just feel so blessed to be a part of this piece. It's truly amazing to me. Watching all of this happen is, I love it.
It makes me feel good. I feel good. I know I'm going to smile when I go to sleep tonight. Okay. I'm going to feel okay.
oh man,
Seriously.
that's exactly how I feel. I feel satisfied, right? It's like,
Right.
Again, so much conversation and so much covered and so much more to uncover and have a discussion. Thank you so much, Joe, for taking on Danielle's and I questions and kind of digging a little bit deeper into the podcast with your brother and sister. It's very much appreciated, and I'm sure that everybody's gonna have.
well, I appreciate the support and the venue here to be able to talk about it. So I don't know that I would have wanted anybody else to be there. So I'm glad that you both were there. Danielle, again, thank you for all of your input and inquisitive questions that make me think even more about myself.
You're welcome. I continue to appreciate being part of this journey because it spawned so much thought and more things to think about and more conversations that need to be had. So thank you for that.
Well, you've been listening to Out of the Starting Blocks and Into the Race. And remember, the baggage that you carry throughout life is a lot lighter when you remember to make space for help.
Thank you to our guests today, Danielle, Raheem, and Tamisha, and our editor, Lily Hamilton. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating and a review. To stay up to date with Out of the Starting Blocks and Into the Race and get all the behind-scenes content, you can follow us on Instagram at Tornado Tools and on X at Joe Tools. Make sure you hit subscribe if you haven't already and visit our website at joetools.com.